I think, the point that you made about before Trump, whether it was the Democratic government, whether it was the Republican government, it was more of the same. It was essentially you were getting the same thing just in a blue package or a red package. What is highlighted, what has really highlighted that for me is the omission of Tulsi Gabbard from the DNC convention. The fact that they didn't even invite her. They invited somebody who has, obviously they picked Kamala and they invited people who have won way less delegates than Tulsi Gabbard did. But they didn't even invite her simply because she was not willing to, just go with the flow, simply because she was not afraid to speak up, simply because she attacked the then Democratic darling Kamala Harris, and very validly attacked her, I may add, also. So go ahead.
And notice the person that she had supported, the biggest backstab was from the so-called outsider Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Who turned out to be as big of a sold-out crook and an intellectual prostitute as any of them.
Surprise. Yeah.
And why is that surprising? I mean, this is a fellow who's a millionaire who owns 2 homes, including a lakeside home, and then claims to be talking for the small guy and whatnot.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, if you can't tell a fraud from 5 miles away, then, you get what you deserve.
Yeah, exactly. And that, I think, really does show you that, as much as the Democratic Party talks about change, as much as the Democratic Party talks about, oh, look how different we are from the Republicans. Are you though? Because you took Bernie, who was supposed to be this, this radical, he's going to bring about these radical changes. You basically beat him into submission. And the one lady that refuses to get beat into submission, you're just trying to ignore her like she never existed. You're trying to ignore her that she wasn't even present on the debate stage. You're trying to ignore her like she didn't even end Kamala Harris's career back then. So that tells you, I feel like, all you need to know about the acceptance and the diversity that the Democratic Party really allows. So I think your point that whether it's the Republicans or it's the Democrat, before Trump, it was all of the same. And I'd argue, even after Trump, the Democratic Party hasn't really changed. It's still the same party, In
that sense, the Democrats are stuck in the same place that the Indian National Congress is.
Yeah.
They're doing the same thing over and over again, and they're not realizing why they're losing. Right. And that becomes very, very problematic for the Democrats because they're playing to the echo chamber. The last time when they tried, at least they didn't try to get a woke candidate. It was Hillary who was a crook. That's fine.
Yeah.
They all are at some level. And the vice president guy was a very sweet fellow. I forget his name now.
Tim Kaine.
Tim Kaine, yeah. Really nice person, really good human being, right? Yeah. But you couldn't win with that because your entire platform was against manufacturing, against the Rust Belt, looking down at them and scorning them, punishing them for being poor, punishing them for having fallen on bad times.
Yes.
And now you have a guy who, your presidential nominee, is actively somebody who is probably in the early stages of Alzheimer's, and a vice presidential candidate who is going to rub people who was almost a member of the squad, almost, not entirely, but almost, who is going to rub people as badly as Ilhan, Rashid, and co did. Now, remember, I have said this before on your show and I've written about it, that Ilhan, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and all of that, they were probably secretly funded, like I think Rahul Gandhi is secretly funded by Modi. I think these 3 dingbats are secretly funded by Trump, because as long as these 3 dingbats are around, Trump can't lose an election. And, I genuinely believe Trump has bribed members of the DNC to put this Kamala lady into the ticket. She has already pissed off so many people. First of all, she accused Biden of being a racist. And when that idiot Colbert, who anyway looks like a retard, calls her out on it, she's like, it was a debate. And then,
Yeah.
Is criticism such?
She said that she believes her accusers that accuse her of him of sexual assault. She said she believes them.
Exactly. So clearly she does not.
Yeah.
She's going to get hammered.
Yeah.
She's actually going to, and this is where I disagree with Kushal, which is where I believe that the Republicans this time, it's going to be like Bush 1 and Bush 2. You remember there was a lot of controversy if Bush won the first
Yeah.
election.
Yeah.
But then he won the second term very convincingly. I think that's how it's going to be this time as well, because this lady is actually going to turn traditional voters outright against all of this.
Yeah.
She's also somebody who has a deeply problem. Those questions that why did Tulsi manage to knock her out of the primaries? She went from 15% to 0.
Pretty
Right.
much overnight. Yeah.
These questions were never answered. They're still there.
And I can understand that people will feel, Abhijit, I can also understand people feeling like she was one of the first people to drop out of the primaries, which means we did not want her. And now she has leapfrogged all of those other deserving candidates that we voted for, and she's now at the front of the line. What do you think Tulsi should do next? Because the Democrats seem to be doing their utmost, and now that the squad and the progressives have so much power, she is absolute anathema to them. So what should be Tulsi's next step, given that she's a very promising, young politician?
She really needs to understand that her principles aren't going to take her anywhere. She's too principled for her own good.
Yeah.
She needs to put some self-interest in there and jump ship and move over to the Republicans, where she will be celebrated. I really think so, yes.
Republicans do like her.
They do like her. And even
voters,
if she opposes them, and this is where, I always find there's a lot more intellectual honesty in the right, both in India and in America and in the UK, everywhere, except maybe in Pakistan, that they will acknowledge the fact that your criticism is valid when it is valid.
Yeah.
And her criticisms are valid, and I think she needs to bring that slight left tinge. I think the Republican outreach to the Rust Belt can only be strengthened by people like Tulsi Gabbard, because they need an advocate in the Republican Party, and I think Tulsi will be that advocate.
I mean, they kind of did that. Like, if you look at Britain, like the Tories moved a little bit to the left when it comes to support for the NHS and those kinds of things.
It's across the board you're seeing this, that, but it's not a move to the left per se. What it is that capitalism was intrinsically linked to manufacturing. So it is support for manufacturing, which is the real basis of your economy. Remember that. It is that the higher up the value chain you go, the greater the value addition, and all these services are concocted to, even though they form 75% of most developed economies, they are concocted and based on the value addition produced by manufacturing. Right? Now, these are the kind of jobs that need an advocate, that the Republicans, the right has always been an advocate of, and they've never shifted away from that. Whereas what you see with Democrats is that they were always sort of this more airy-fairy kind of thing, and they were always more pro-services, which are basically made-up shit, in a sense.
Yeah.
And that is where they are traditionally going with, because you look at the woke movements.
Yeah.
They are essentially service sector workers, non-STEM, all humanities trash. And I say this being humanities trash myself. I fully acknowledge my inferiority to my STEM colleagues.
Right.
I will never pretend that what I do is equal to what they do. They do real value addition. I do hot air ballooning. Realistically, I mean, let's be clear about it. Where is the profit in denying that? It still has its own value add, but will an Abhijit Iyer-Mitra analysis ever be equivalent to, say, I don't know, a Vignesh Iyer coming up with a new device on a Boeing jet that reduces fuel consumption by about 15 liters per hour of flying? Of course not. So we need to be very clear about these things. So I don't think they've shifted. And this is where I think where Tulsi supports the people that are losing their jobs, the real manufacturing.
Yeah.
They are the ones that need to shepherd her into the Republican Party now, because I think she's a much better fit for the Republicans.